Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. For a region where 40,000 people have been killed in a war, it is hard to say that the situation is getting worse. What can be worse than this? An all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. It will be worse, especially if Israel launches a ground offensive in Lebanon. Apparently, it's preparing for one. Can no one stop Netanyahu? Lebanon says Joe Biden can, but he won't, because his party has an election to fight and he's bankrolling one more war and giving cluster bombs to Ukraine. But Donald Trump says if he comes to power, he will stop arming Kiev. Where does that leave Vladimir Zelensky? We'll discuss all of that. In other news, Saudi Arabia wants Pakistan to stop beggars coming in the name of the Hajj pilgrimage and staying on. China has test-fired its first intercontinental ballistic missile in the Pacific in more than 4 decades. India is seeing an IPO gold rush, but the market regulator has some concerns. Turkish President Erdogan seems to be mending his ways. For the first time in many years, he's not mentioned Kashmir at the United Nations. Indian courts debate whether trials should be live-streamed. Russia scores another win over the West in Africa, this time with a satellite deal with 3 countries. And a second death in India attributed to overwork has triggered a serious conversation on where we should draw the line. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Is Iran trying to kill Donald Trump? The US Republican presidential candidate claims there are big threats to his life from Tehran. Trump's team says the US intelligence has warned the former president, but Iran rejects the accusations. Since July, there have been 2 assassination attempts on Trump. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faces a no-confidence vote. It's the first major test of his unpopular minority government. While the motion is not expected to succeed, Trudeau is lagging far behind in the opinion polls. The opposition Conservative Party wants a snap election. Trudeau has been in power since 2015. India is now the 3rd most powerful country in Asia. That's according to the Asia Power Index published by Australia's Lowy Institute. India overtakes Japan to reach this milestone. The driving factors include India's robust economy and young population. Staying with India, Jammu and Kashmir votes in the second phase of the assembly election. Voter turnout was more than 50%. Raisi district in Jammu recorded the highest polling percentage and Srinagar the lowest. The third and final phase of voting will take place on the 1st of October. The results will be announced on the 8th. The Philippines backs the permanent stay of a US missile system in the country. China warns that this will destabilize the region. In April, the US had deployed the Typhoon missile system. It was for the annual joint military exercises, but Washington did not pull it out of the Philippines even after the war games. And Volkswagen bosses and union workers start crunch talks. It's over the ailing German auto giant's drastic cost-cutting plans. Thousands of staff are on protest as the company mulls closing factories in Germany and deep job cuts. Volkswagen is Europe's biggest car maker. West Asia remains on the edge. It sounds like a cliche given how many times we've said this over the past few months, but that doesn't take away from the severity of the situation. A major escalation appears more likely now than it did in the past 1 year. Today, Hezbollah tried to target the Mossad. That's Israel's intelligence agency. Hezbollah fired a ballistic missile towards Tel Aviv. Sirens rang across the city. Take a look at this. The missile was intercepted before it could cause any harm, but it wasn't the only one that was fired. There's been a series of attacks in the north too, near the Israel-Lebanon border. Cross-border attacks are intensifying there. Israel has launched a major bombing operation with large-scale aerial attacks inside Lebanon. Israel dispatched 250 jets. They dropped at least 2,000 munitions on 1,600 targets in Lebanon. 1,600 targets. These attacks were carried out in 4 waves. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they've struck Hezbollah infrastructure, including targets in the Lebanese capital Beirut. South Beirut to be precise, which is a Hezbollah stronghold. One of its commanders was killed in the strikes. Hezbollah confirmed the death today of one of their commanders. Israel claims that they've eliminated 2 more Hezbollah commanders. All in all, more than 500 people have died and over 1,800 are injured. Many of these are believed to be civilians. In fact, they seem to have suffered the maximum damage in these attacks. Look at these pictures. These were residential areas. These attacks from Israel have triggered a mass exodus in Lebanon. One report says more than 100,000 people have been displaced so far. Again, these are civilians, mostly those who had homes near the Israeli border.
Before this time, there were no strikes taking place in our hometown. We used to hear sounds of strikes in our surroundings. The day before yesterday, strikes started getting closer and Israeli planes were in the sky. For sure, we were scared bit by bit. It reached the fields outside the village and inside it. Of course, we could not stay. Everyone is scared. We carried ourselves, packed our clothes, and we left.
A new phase of war has begun. Israel's defense minister made this statement last week. In fact, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah used the same words, a new phase of war. And that's what it is, really. Though it's not clear how far Israel plans to take it. Will Netanyahu launch a ground offensive in Lebanon? Israeli media says the IDF is preparing for one. The IDF is the Israeli Defense Force. Reports say that they had a meeting attended by Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant and a team of soldiers. Apparently, these are the soldiers who are preparing for the ground offensive. Now, Israel has not confirmed this report, but more importantly, they haven't denied it. So a ground offensive is not off the table. And that makes the situation even more serious. On the other side, Hezbollah is launching retaliatory attacks. It continues to fire missiles into Israel.
During the past few hours, Safed and its periphery a heavy barrage of tens of items. Unfortunately, we had a direct hit to one of the homes in one of the neighborhoods of the city of Safed. Luckily, the family is currently staying out of the country, so this event caused no casualties. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen hits in houses where the residents stayed in safe areas, especially safe rooms, and were spared.
The global community is ringing alarm bells. Several world leaders are in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Antonio Guterres has issued a strong statement. He is the Secretary General of the UN. He said tensions in West Asia have become, and I'm quoting, a non-stop nightmare, which could take the entire region down, and Lebanon could become another Gaza.
Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
That was a powerful statement, but the repeated appeals also expose his limitations. The United Nations has no teeth. It cannot enforce a ceasefire in West Asia or anywhere else for that matter. So all Guterres can do is make appeals for de-escalation. The need of the hour is to break this cycle of violence, because if Israel attacks Lebanon on the ground, it will force the hand of the other side, including players like Iran. Iran, as you would know, is the key sponsor of Hezbollah. It funds this organization. It trains its fighters. For the moment, Iran is calling for a ceasefire. But if Israel launches a ground offensive, it will leave Iran with no choice, really. Tehran will have to respond in kind.
Naturally blind Israeli state terrorism over the past few days in Lebanon, followed by a massive aggression with thousands of victims, cannot go unanswered. The responsibility for all consequences will be borne by those governments who have thwarted all global efforts to end this horrific catastrophe and have the audacity to call themselves champions of human rights.
Iran could be gearing up for an escalation. Reports say it has sought help from Russia. The two sides held secret talks. Iran wants cruise missiles from Russia. It wants to ship these missiles to the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are another proxy group of Tehran. So if Israel escalates, Iran could ask the Houthis to mobilize, possibly in the Red Sea. Whichever way you look at it, the picture looks alarming. West Asia is on the edge of a precipice.
We're still hoping that the United States is the only country that can really make a difference in the Middle East and with regard to Lebanon.
There's no point expecting Netanyahu to de-escalate. He's clearly gone rogue. The only solution is to arm twist him, to force him to end this war. And who can do that? The obvious candidate is the United States of America. Even Lebanon knows this. They're staring at a full-scale war with Israel. In public, the Hezbollah may act brave, but the ground reality is quite different. Lebanon's economy cannot bankroll a long war, which is why their government is hoping for a diplomatic solution, and they want the United States to help them.
We're still hoping that the United States is the only country that can really make a difference in the Middle East and with regard to Lebanon. The more we think about it, is the United States is the key to our, I would say, salvation, if I can use this word.
No offense here. If the US is your salvation, you're already doomed. But we get why Lebanon is saying this, because Washington is supposed to have leverage over Israel. Around 69% of their weapons come from the US, 69% of Israeli weapons. We're talking missiles, bullets, jets, all kinds of strategic weapons. Even the Iron Dome is replenished by US funding. Same with aid. The US gives Israel around $3.8 billion every year. This is mostly used to buy weapons. And don't forget the diplomatic support. Israel has killed more than 40,000 civilians in Gaza, yet their leaders face no consequences, no arrest warrant, no UN Security Council criticism, and no arms embargo. Why is that? Because of US political support. Any other country would have been isolated and sanctioned by now. But the US keeps defending Israel. Every time the UNSC tries to condemn them, the US vetoes. So yes, Biden does have leverage. He can force Netanyahu to stop this war. Then why doesn't he? Because of politics. Biden's criticism of Israel is always half-hearted. Even at the United Nations General Assembly, he blamed Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, unprovoked, during the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible.
So Biden is batting for peace and diplomacy. But guess how he's trying to achieve it? By sending tons of weapons to Israel. I have some numbers for you. The US has sent 500 plane loads of weapons to Israel since October last year. 500 full planes of weapons. Plus nearly 107 ships full of weapons. Put together, that's 50,000 tons of weapons. Is this how you stop a war? By sending more weapons. Just last month, Biden approved another arms package. It's worth around $20 billion. Israel will get fighter jets, missiles, and tank rounds from the US. The only restraint we saw was in the month of March. That's when Biden paused one arms shipment to Israel, just one. You cannot call that a policy change. That was a symbolic move, one that Netanyahu brushed aside, which brings us back to the same question. Why isn't the US doing more? The simple answer is vote bank politics. The United States has nearly 7.5 million Jews, and they could decide who ends up in the White House. The Jewish voters. How? Just look at Pennsylvania. It's a key swing state in the US electoral map. Joe Biden won this state in 2020 by just 80,000 votes. And how many Jewish voters does Pennsylvania have? 300,000. Now, traditionally, American Jews prefer the Democrats. Polls suggest that 69% lean Democrat, only 29% of the Jewish voters lean Republican. But what happens if some of them defect? If they vote for Donald Trump instead of Kamala Harris? She could lose important swing states. Which is why Joe Biden is not doing anything to rein in Israel. His hypocrisy is clear for all to see. At the UNGA, he dropped a supposed pearl of wisdom. He said people are more important than staying in power.
My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most.
He forgot to add a caveat. People in Gaza do not fall under this bracket, nor do civilians in Lebanon. When it comes to them, I guess staying in power is more important. But forget the people of Gaza or Lebanon. Why doesn't Joe Biden listen to his own people? They are protesting across US cities. They're asking Israel to end the war.
Free, free Palestine. Israel wants. USA pays. How many kids did you kill today? Not another penny, not another dollar.
So our fellow democracies, India has called for a ceasefire. All of Europe has called for a ceasefire. Countries in Africa and Latin America have done the same, yet the US is unwilling to do the needful. We know Washington thinks of itself as a global policeman. Well, now we know what kind, a corrupt and duplicitous one.
We're stuck in that war unless I'm president. I'll get it done. I'll get it negotiated. I'll get out. We got to get out.
You would think enabling one war is tough, but the US is enabling two, Gaza and Ukraine. Kiev did not really have to lobby for US support. Joe Biden offered it voluntarily. But pretty soon that could change. President Zelensky is visiting the US right now, and he's about to face a challenge bigger than Russia: American domestic politics. He will meet Biden, Trump, and Harris on Thursday. He will share his victory plan with all of them. We've told you about this before. Zelensky's plan involves multiple stages and strategies like military packages, diplomatic summits, and security guarantees. He wants to end the war on his terms. Today, Zelensky spoke at the United Nations General Assembly. He criticized what he called half-hearted peace plans.
When some propose alternatives, half-hearted settlement plans, so-called sets of principles, it not only ignores the interests and suffering of Ukrainians, who are affected by the war the most. It not only ignores reality, but also gives Putin the political space to continue the war and pressure the world to bring more nations under control.
Maybe Biden and Harris will support Zelensky's plan, but the question is, will Donald Trump do it? He's campaigning on an anti-war platform, and he is not keen on supporting Ukraine. This week, he made that pretty clear. Trump called Zelensky the greatest salesman ever. He also promised to get the US out of Ukraine.
Zelensky comes to the United States. He walks away with $100 billion. I think he's the greatest salesman on earth. But we're stuck in that war unless I'm president. I'll get it done. I'll get it negotiated. I'll get out. We got to get out.
Trump isn't famous for clarity, but that's as clear as they come. He wants to stop military assistance to Ukraine. Now, let's assume that he actually does that. How would it shape the war? The US is the biggest military donor to Ukraine. They've given weapons worth $56 billion so far. Germany is second, and they have given just $11 billion, 56 versus 11. Britain is third with $10 billion. So the US leads by a long way. If that support ends, Kiev may lose the war against Russia. It's as simple as that. Yes, Europe could try to plug the gap, but Europe itself is dependent on American weapons. Around 55% of their arms imports, European arms imports, come from the US, which makes one thing obvious. A Trump presidency is bad news for Zelensky. So what's he doing about it? For starters, he's meeting US lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, and the idea is pretty simple. If Donald Trump won't give him weapons, maybe the US Congress will. Secondly, he's wooing the global south, basically developing and underdeveloped countries. They've mostly stayed neutral in this war, but Zelensky is hoping to win them over. How? He plans to hold the next peace summit in the global south. If they back him, it would put pressure on Russia. After all, the global south is made up of more than 120 countries, which brings us to the third part of his plan, milking the Biden presidency. Joe Biden still has around 4 months left in office. In this time, he could send more weapons. In fact, a new shipment is set to be announced soon. It's worth $375 million. And what does it include? Cluster bombs, different types of rockets and armored vehicles. Now, the cluster bombs stand out because these are banned by 124 countries, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A single projectile contains smaller bomblets. When released, they scatter and explode. So the damage is often widespread and indiscriminate, which is why 124 nations have banned them, but not the US, Russia, or Ukraine. And talk about the hypocrisy. In 2022, some reports claimed that Russia was dropping cluster bombs on Ukraine. See how the White House criticized it.
There are reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians. If that's true, what is the next step of this administration, and is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime?
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime.
When Russia does it, it's a potential war crime. But when the US does it, it's totally fine. And that sums up America's attitude. And honestly, we feel for Ukraine. One US president is sending them illegal weapons. That's how supportive he is. But the next one may end up sending them nothing. It's the definition of volatility, of unreliability. We get that different leaders have different policies, but surely there must be some continuity. If not, how are partners and allies supposed to function? How are they supposed to count on you? Well, perhaps they shouldn't. Perhaps that is the bigger lesson here. Don't depend on the US for your protection or safety. Sort it out yourself. Our next story involves Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Over the last few days, Islamabad has ramped up praise for Riyadh. Saudi Arabia celebrated its National Day on Monday, and like a bunch of distant, freeloading relatives, Pakistan's politicians were ready to party. Their president, Asif Ali Zardari, went to the Saudi embassy along with a bunch of ministers, diplomats, and of course, military officers. Zardari was soon singing praises, lauding the vision of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and promising to further strengthen Saudi-Pakistan bilateral ties. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif could not be there in person, but he sent a video message. And he waxed eloquent about Saudi's global leadership role. Sharif also thanked Riyadh for all the financial help. Pakistan is due to get another tranche of pocket money from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and it wouldn't have been possible without Saudi assistance. We don't know the details yet, but Islamabad was hoping for over $1 billion from Riyadh recently, so the kingdom probably opened its checkbook again, which explains the fresh bout of Pakistani sycophancy. But there's also another reason for Pakistan to flatter Saudi Arabia. The kingdom has been annoyed lately because of a problem that just refuses to go away: the issue of Pakistani beggars. For years now, some Pakistani people have been making their way to Saudi Arabia purportedly to make a pilgrimage to the Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina. But some Pakistani people get a pilgrimage visa, land in Saudi Arabia, and proceed to beg, sometimes right outside the holy sites. And this has been a problem for years. Some shocking details had emerged last September. Apparently, 90% of the beggars arrested in foreign countries were Pakistani, 90%. This is in countries like Iran, Iraq, and the UAE, and of course, Saudi Arabia. And it's not just the beggars. There are Pakistani pickpockets too, sometimes right outside the Grand Mosque in Mecca. There has been some misreporting around this issue too. Some publications said that begging remittances amounted to $42 billion or 12% of Pakistan's GDP. That number is absurd and it's not true. But a lot of people believed it because the problem of Pakistani beggars is so widespread. Saudi Arabia has raised this issue time and again, as recently as last month in fact. The Saudi ambassador met with Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi, and Naqvi promised to take, and I'm quoting, robust action. He said all the right things about how Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency was on the case, that they would target Pakistan's beggar trafficking mafia. And what was the result of all that talk? Pakistan managed to arrest 11 people. Their investigation agency picked up 11 suspicious-looking pilgrims at the Karachi airport, and this was days after the meeting with the Saudi ambassador. The arrest was splashed all over the news, and it seems Islamabad thought that was that, job done. But it wasn't. It did not make much of a dent because Riyadh is raising the same issue again. This time they've sent a letter to Pakistan's Ministry of Religious Affairs, warning of dire consequences. Riyadh said that it could be forced to take action and restrict pilgrimage visas for people from Pakistan. That could lead to collateral damage affecting the genuine pilgrims as well. But it seems that Riyadh is running out of patience and won't tolerate it much longer, no matter how much Zardari and Sharif fawn over the kingdom. Now let's tell you about Pakistan's iron brother China. It's making trouble again, this time in the Pacific. China has launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. It was carrying a dummy warhead and it landed in the Pacific. Not many details are available except the fact that this is very rare. The last time China did something like this was way back in 1980. So this is being seen as a significant move. And it's left other countries alarmed. Japan, for instance, says it received no warning, and Australia wants an explanation. So why did China conduct this launch? And what message is it trying to send? Our next report tells you.
On Wednesday, China launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. It was armed with a dummy warhead and fell into the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The exact flight path remains unclear, but this is how the missile likely went from China to the waters. Beijing is calling it a routine test.
China's People's Liberation Army Rocket Force launched an intercontinental ballistic missile carrying a dummy warhead to the high seas in the Pacific Ocean at 8:44 on September 25th, and the missile fell into expected sea areas. This test launch is a routine arrangement in our annual training plan. It is in line with international law and international practice and is not directed against any country or target.
But this launch is anything but ordinary. In fact, it's extremely rare. China tests its nuclear weapons domestically. It has tested ICBMs before, but they were test-fired in the Xinjiang region. This is the first time since 1980 that China is testing an ICBM in international waters. And of course, it's left the region alarmed. China says it warned relevant countries beforehand, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Japan says it received no such notice. New Zealand calls it an unwelcome development. Australia is seeking an explanation for this launch. Now, this isn't the first time Beijing has done this. It first test-fired an ICBM into the South Pacific in the 1980s. But since then, it has conducted such tests in its own airspace. There are no details about the missile either, but it's likely a DF-41. It was displayed in 2019 during China's 70th anniversary parade. It's a road and mobile intercontinental ballistic missile. It can probably carry up to 3 nuclear warheads. More importantly, it has a range of 12 to 15,000 kilometers. So that means it can hit the entire continental United States. Which brings us to the main question. Why conduct this test now? Well, it has to do with the changing dynamics. China conducted its first nuclear test in 1964. It has since maintained a policy of no first use. Its arsenal was comparatively small, but that has changed now. Beijing is on a massive military modernization drive, and that includes upgrading and expanding its nuclear arsenal. By 2023, China had over 500 operational warheads. That's the world's third largest stockpile of nuclear warheads, surpassed only by Russia and the United States. But last October, Washington came out with a report. It said Beijing was developing nukes more quickly than anticipated. At this rate, it would have over 1,000 warheads by 2030. Which brings us to intercontinental ballistic missiles. These missiles can hit anywhere in the world. But who was this launch aimed at? Right now, China is at odds in the Pacific with a lot of nations. This includes Japan and the Philippines and self-ruled Taiwan. Then there's the United States. Their relationship may have improved, but tensions remain. So while it's hard to say whether the launch was aimed at just one country, the purpose remains the same: posturing. Through this launch, China is yet again trying to flex its muscles in the region.
Now let's talk about the Indian markets. What draws an investor to the share market? The hope of outsized returns, of a stock that will double, triple, even quadruple their returns. Investors call these stocks multi-baggers. They're like unicorns for investors, very hard to find. Do you know which is the best time to grab these investments? When a company goes public for the first time, when it opens its IPO, initial public offering, it's the first time a company sells its shares to the public. Indian markets are buzzing with IPOs. Many big ones are lined up in the coming months. Car maker Hyundai is among them. Hyundai's India unit is gearing up for its IPO. It could be launched next month. Reports say Hyundai India could be worth $20 billion. The company wants to raise some $3 billion in this IPO. This could be India's biggest ever IPO. Right now, the record is held by LIC, that's Life Insurance Corporation of India. LIC is a state-owned entity. It is India's biggest insurer. It went public in the year 2022 and raised some $2.7 billion. If Hyundai raises $3 billion, it will beat LIC's record. Hyundai is one of India's top car sellers. It is also India's largest passenger car exporter. Hyundai's India arm exports cars to more than 80 countries. And of course, there is a brand name. Hyundai is one of the most recognizable car brands in the world, as well as on Indian roads. So when Hyundai makes the announcement, expect investors to make a beeline for this stock. In fact, that's been the case with most IPOs this year. More than 150 companies went public in the last 9 months. Together, they have raised close to $5 billion through IPOs. There is great investor appetite for new listings. And the reason remains the same: the possibility of outsized returns. That's the mindset of most investors. You see, when a company goes public, when it offers its shares to outsiders for the first time, a lot of investors see it as a money-making opportunity. They want to invest early in the hope that they'll get the shares for cheap, since the stock is just entering the market. And once the company goes public, when its value starts to grow, the investors will make an outsized profit. That is the hope, that is the approach. Now, SEBI recently did a study about this trend. SEBI is the Securities and Exchange Board of India. It's India's market regulator. It found that around 50% of investors sell their shares within a week of buying an IPO. They sell it. And which investors are these? Retail investors. They engage in what experts call flipping. That is not illegal, but it doesn't always work. It doesn't always make money for you. For instance, you buy shares in an IPO, and then when the company lists, the share price tanks. And this has happened with many recent listings in India. So there's no guarantee that investing in an IPO will make you a quick buck. But retail investors remain vulnerable to speculation, and SEBI is worried about this. It is scrutinizing some recent IPOs, and this is according to a Reuters report. It says SEBI is probing 6 investment banks. These banks helped some small businesses go public. What is SEBI investigating them for? Apparently, these banks charged a higher fee during the listings. What does that do? It leads to oversubscription of an IPO. It creates artificial demand. Apparently, fake bids were made for the shares of these companies to drive up the demand and to attract more investors. We'll have to wait for the final outcome of this investigation, but SEBI is already tweaking the rules. It is introducing more checks and balances for IPOs. So the next time you think about applying for one, look through the listing carefully and think twice before you invest. Not everything that glitters in the stock market is gold. Let's bring you the latest from the United Nations General Assembly. World leaders are speaking in New York, and yesterday it was the turn of Turkish President Erdogan. He took the stage, he spoke about a lot of issues from Gaza to the Paris Olympics, but surprisingly, his speech did not include Kashmir. And this is for the first time in many years that he hasn't brought up Kashmir at the UNGA, the first time since 2019. What explains this change of heart? Is he finally mending his ways? Does he want closer ties with India? Or has he found a bigger cause in Gaza? Our next report tells you.
The UN General Assembly is underway in New York. It's the 79th session, and by now, some things are tradition. Brazil always speaks first. Speakers never abide by the time limit. And the Turkish president talks about Kashmir. It's almost like a ritual. Erdogan's been doing it since 2019.
One of the problems to which the international community fails to devote enough attention is the Kashmiri conflict, awaiting a solution for 72 years. Kashmir is still besieged, and 8 million people are still stuck in Kashmir.
The Kashmir conflict, which is also key to the stability and peace of South Asia, is still a burning issue.
We maintain our stance in favor of solving the ongoing problem in Kashmir for 74 years through dialogue between the parties. We hope and pray that a fair and a permanent peace and prosperity will be established in Kashmir. Another development that will pave the way for regional peace, stability and prosperity in South Asia will be the establishment of a just and lasting peace in Kashmir.
But this time, he did something different. He didn't mention Kashmir. Instead, the Turkish president spoke about Gaza, compared Netanyahu to Hitler, talked about dying Western values, slammed the Paris Olympics opening ceremony, promoted family values. A wide range of points, truly, but no mention of Kashmir. Now, only 2 countries talk about Kashmir at the UNGA, Pakistan and Turkey. In 2019, Article 370 was revoked. 370 is what gave a special status to Jammu and Kashmir. It was scrapped in 2019. Kashmir lost its special status, and Erdogan found a new cause. He emerged as a vocal critic. He brought up Kashmir again and again at the United Nations. Every year he speaks about it at the UNGA. India rejects it, and life goes on. In 2019, he said Kashmiris are under blockade. In 2020, he called it a burning issue. But since then, he has dialed it down a notch. In 2021, he called for dialogue. In 2022, he called for permanent peace. And in 2023, Erdogan called for India and Pakistan to engage for lasting peace. You can see a trend here. He started out strong, but his tone has been shifting. And this year, he didn't even bring it up. There could be 2 reasons behind this. The first is the cause. For a while, Erdogan has wanted to lead the Islamic world. For that, he needed a cause. He found that in Kashmir. He didn't really care about Muslims in Kashmir. He just cared about the optics. But now, he's found a bigger cause. Gaza. Palestinians are dying every day. The world is focusing on the war. So Erdogan likely shifted tack, seemingly forgetting about his original crusade. The second reason could be rapprochement. In 2023, Erdogan visited India for the G20 summit. He held talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He also backed India's UNSC membership bid. Of course, there's no trusting Erdogan. He can say one thing today and do a complete U-turn tomorrow. But his softening stance could be an indication of wanting closer relations with India. Plus, Turkey wants to join the BRICS, a group where India is a key member. Also, there's the economic aspect as well. Turkey's economy has been reeling for some time now. So Erdogan had to give up on his Islamic world dreams and find common cause with countries. He did that with Saudi Arabia, he did that with Israel, and he's likely trying to do it with India too.
There's a new debate in India, one that involves transparency and trust. Should court proceedings be live streamed or not? That's the question. Today, the Supreme Court of India weighed in and they said yes, proceedings must be live streamed. But why did the debate emerge in the first place, and what's the point of live streaming? First, the history. In 2018, the Supreme Court of India delivered an important verdict. It said cases of national importance must be live streamed. The idea was to promote transparency. Since then, a lot of courts have started doing it, like the Karnataka High Court, the Gujarat High Court, the Jharkhand High Court, and of course, the Supreme Court of India. All of them have YouTube channels now. You can log on and watch the proceedings live. Not all trials are streamed, though, only the ones of national importance. Which brings us to this controversy. Recently, clips from the Karnataka High Court went viral. They involved Justice V. Srishananda. He was heard making some objectionable remarks. In one clip, he called a place in Bengaluru, Pakistan. In another, he mocked a female lawyer. Both these clips began making the rounds on social media, so the judge was widely panned. That's when a lawyers' association stepped in. They asked the court to stop the live streaming. They said it was being misused by the public. Now, the court did not stop the live streaming, but they barred people from sharing the clips. Later, the Supreme Court waded in. They accepted an apology from the Karnataka judge, so no further action was taken. But the Chief Justice did make some strong observations.
But should I tell you, the answer to sunlight is more sunlight.
That's true.
Not to suppress what happens in the courts, because I think this is a very important reminder to everyone. And the answer is not to close doors and shut everything down, but to say that, look, please, our reach extends beyond these four walls.
Certainly, I'm not suggesting that at all.
Let me recap that. A, shutting the door is not an option, so live streaming will continue. And B, judges must be more careful. They've been asked to refrain from casual remarks. And frankly, it's solid advice. Some courtroom remarks really make you sit up and you wonder whether a judge actually said it or not. And the strange part, most of these remarks don't make it to the official document or judgment. They're just observations. So who are they meant for? Social media, newspapers? It's hard to say. But for now, let's focus on live streaming. The Chief Justice has defended the practice. But it doesn't end the debate. Some top lawyers have also joined the chorus, like Kapil Sibal. He's the president of the Supreme Court Bar Association, and he says, stop the live streaming, especially of the recent Kolkata rape trial. Now, Sibal is representing the state of West Bengal in this case, and he says he's getting threats because of the live streaming and that his reputation is being tarnished. He's got a point. How would you feel if someone had a camera at your workstation, if your work was constantly streamed on YouTube? It can be uncomfortable. But I'm afraid national interest trumps this concern. These cases are of public importance. People deserve to see what the judges are saying, what the state is saying. If not, we'll have to rely on second-hand reports, and that's never ideal. It can lead to misinformation or fake news. Every country has a different way of handling this issue. In Germany and France, there is no streaming. There is no recording of any kind. In the US, the Supreme Court releases only the audio, and that too only the next day or the next week. It's not live streamed like here in India. In Australia too, there is a delay. But in Canada and Britain, it is live streamed. So the big picture is clear. Most big democracies record their court proceedings. It's important for transparency and trust. There's no reason why India should not do the same. And yes, there are downsides to it. Some judges may get trolled. Lawyers may get embarrassed and trials may become a public spectacle. We saw that in the United States. Actors Johnny Depp and Amber Heard had a bitter legal battle. Netflix made a whole show out of the live stream. Even the lawyers became social media stars. But that's not really the idea behind live streaming. It's not about the lawyers or the judges at all. It's about the ordinary citizens. Now let's look at what Russia is up to. Moscow has been ostracized by much of the world, but it's not isolated. On the contrary, it is making new friends and strengthening existing partnerships. Let's take the example of West Africa, of 3 countries in the Sahel. Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, these 3 countries are run by military juntas, and the juntas have chosen to cut ties with their traditional Western partners, like their former colonial overlord, France. Instead, the 3 Sahel states have turned to Russia for security support and development projects. The latest example of this is a satellite deal. Russia will help these 3 Sahel states develop satellites for security and communication purposes. It's a long-term project, and it shows how Russia has stolen a march on the West in Africa. Here's our report.
A new deal has been signed in West Africa. A satellite deal between Russia and 3 West African nations, Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. These African nations are part of a confederation called the Alliance of Sahel States. The 3 allies are former French colonies and are currently governed by military juntas who took control in the last few years. The juntas came to power to fight a major regional issue, terrorism. All 3 nations are fighting terror insurgencies. A number of groups are active in the Sahel region. You have Al-Qaeda, multiple branches of the Islamic State, and smaller regional players like the JNIM and Boko Haram. All these terror groups have been waging a war in the Sahel region, and Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso have borne the brunt of their attacks. The countries used to fight the terrorists together with the West, but that changed after the military took over. The juntas cut ties with the Western forces, which were led by their former colonial overlord, France. Instead, they chose another player, a country they reportedly have a more sincere and more reactive relationship with, Russia. When the juntas ousted French and Western troops, Russian mercenaries stepped in. The infamous Wagner Group sent its forces to help the 3 Sahel states, and the Kremlin itself has been backing the efforts of the alliance. The most recent show of support is the new satellite deal. It will be a joint project between the Sahel Alliance and Russia's space agency Roscosmos. The satellites will be developed and launched by a subsidiary of Roscosmos called Glavkosmos. There will initially be 2 satellites, one for remote sensing and another for communications. The sensing satellite will provide the Sahel Alliance with high-resolution satellite imagery to track terrorist insurgents who carry out attacks and cross the borders between the 3 countries. The alliance hopes that better tracking will help them prevent terror attacks like the one that took place in Mali's capital Bamako last week. But the satellites won't just be used for military purposes, they will also help the 3 African nations monitor natural disasters like floods, fires and droughts. Then there's the communication satellite. It will reportedly provide television and radio signals across the 3 Sahel states and bring internet and phone services to remote corners of the countries. So that's the plan. But all this won't happen overnight. This is a long-term deal. The initial phase itself will reportedly last 5 years. It will involve setting up the satellite infrastructure and training personnel in the 3 Sahel countries. So the satellite deal won't eradicate terrorism in the Sahel anytime soon. However, it highlights Russia's long-term ambitions. Moscow has made a place for itself in West Africa. It plans to extend its presence there in the years to come and effectively supplant Western influence in the region for good. By the looks of it, Russia is well on its way to doing so, and the satellite deal is just a taste of things to come.
A fiery debate has stirred India. I'm sure you've heard or read about it. This debate is about overwork. It all started with the tragic death, the death of 26-year-old Anna Perail. We told you all about it. Anna was working in Maharashtra at EY, that's Ernst & Young. It's a leading accounting firm. After 4 months of joining EY, she died. And Anna's parents have blamed the company for her death. The quote-unquote overwhelming work pressure. EY has refuted the allegation, but the incident has sparked widespread anger along with an investigation. The Union Labour Ministry is probing the matter. This week, officials inspected the EY office where Anna was working, and new details have emerged. The office has operated since the year 2007, but without a state permit. And this is a key labour permit. It regulates work hours of employees. But the EY office was functioning without it. So while the investigation into the death is still on, this development has added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, in northern India, a similar case has emerged. A woman has died in the city of Lucknow, 45-year-old Sadaf Fatima. She was working at HDFC Bank. This is India's largest private sector bank. Fatima was at work when she allegedly suffered a heart attack. She collapsed and died. The police have launched an investigation. Fatima's colleagues say that she was under work stress. Again, this is a matter of investigation, whether work pressure led to her death. But social media has already reached the conclusion the two deaths have resonated deeply. Workers everywhere are blaming the so-called hustle culture. They're talking about how companies prioritize work, often at the expense of employee well-being. They're sharing personal stories. One user talks about working 20 hours a day without overtime pay. Another talks about being guilt-shamed at work, being mocked for leaving on time. These examples are everywhere, and these concerns are serious. But I'll also say what's politically incorrect. There's another side of the story. Some users say that this culture promotes innovation, that working long hours drives growth, and many workers choose the extra hours out of passion. They want to work more. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has weighed in too. She argued that young workers are unable to cope with stress and that people should learn to handle pressure and build inner strength. Frankly, this is a complicated issue, and both the arguments have merit. On the one hand, India does have a problem of overwork, among the worst in the world, in fact. Look at the data from ILO, International Labour Organization. Half the workforce in India works at least 49 hours a week, making us the country with the second longest working hours after Bhutan. And yes, workers are burnt out. On that list too, India is among the highest globally. It stands at 59%, meaning 59% of Indian workers are burnt out. The global average is 20%. Plus, workers are getting sicker. Cardiovascular diseases and stress are on the rise, especially among the younger population. It's a grim picture, but it's not the whole picture. Work alone is not contributing to poor health and burnout. People are not sleeping enough, not exercising enough. Junk food consumption is on the rise. There is a loneliness epidemic. No wonder we are burnt out. Plus, India is not an isolated case here. The world over, an average worker puts in 9.2 hours of unpaid overtime work every week. So it's not limited to India or to some companies. It's a wider cultural issue. It's a global problem. We live in a digital era. We carry our work with us everywhere we go, on our laptops and on our phones. It's always a call or a text or an email away. And if not, it's on our minds. So regulating working hours may be an unrealistic expectation in today's world. Instead, we should change our mindsets. We are still confusing overwork with hard work or with productive work. These are not the same things. So let me say what I've said before. Work hard, work as much as you want, as long as you want to, as long as you can. But also try to find a balance. Companies will always want you to work more. You have to learn how and where to draw the line. Keir Starmer has such an easy job. He's following Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, so the bar is pretty low. All he has to do is be normal. But maybe that's asking for too much. On Tuesday, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, gave a very important speech. He spoke to the Labour Party conference, the first one since his party returned to power. Again, his brief was quite simple. Be normal, don't slip up. And the first few minutes went fine. But then Starmer turned to the war in Gaza. He demanded the return of hostages captured by Hamas. Just one problem though. Instead of hostages, he said sausages, and cue the meme fest. If you see the video, you can spot the moment he realizes his mistake. It's a train wreck in slow motion.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages, the return of the sausages.
Wait.
The return of the sausages.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. A stadium in Malaysia with 80,000 seats was demolished in seconds using controlled explosives. British and Croatian soldiers take part in joint NATO military drills, and people use buckets of water to fight wildfires in Ecuador. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1926, the Slavery Convention was signed by 20 countries at the League of Nations. All signatories had to eliminate slavery and slave trade in their territories. But the convention offered some exemptions. Britain used these exemptions for its colonies in Myanmar and India. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Any water tankers either. We don't have any solution but to pray so that the wildfire stops, because we can't do anything else than throw buckets of water.